I was sitting here and I had an idea. I was looking at my computer at some of my images from Ponto Beach here in Carlsbad, California. And what we've done before is we put our flip-flops at the end of the stairs that lead down to the beach. This may have been at, I think it was Tower 26, I'm not sure. And then I took a shot of it, but I did it with my iPhone. The resolution is not that great. So I think I need to go back, reshoot this, just do the back part, which would go in the back of the acrylic, and then I would paint in on the front of the acrylic the scene with the stairs. So let's go to the beach. So I actually took two photos. One where I was sitting at the very end of the stairs and the stairs are not included in the photo, which is this one. And then I took another one in which the stairs are included, and this is the part that I want to paint over the first photo. So I'm using this photo here with the stairs included as a reference for the photo that I'm going to paint on. So the piece is mounted and put behind plexiglass, as you saw earlier. So I'm getting ready with my acrylic paints first. So I want to have a good basis layer for the oils later. So I'm doing that with acrylics. And I also do this to get a good idea of where everything goes. So I'm going to start with some burnt sienna. I put in a little bit of acrylic medium just to thin it a little bit. And then I like to use, I like straight lines in this case. So I am going to use these cardboards for a guidance on where the stairs go. This is for the railing. So I'm just using a soft brush. It's probably quarter of an inch wide or something. And I'm just painting in that railing between the two cardboards. I have an iPad on the side here that displays the photo with the stairs on them. when I do this, I would like to get the perspective right compared to the photo that is underneath here. And that reference photo helps a lot in getting this right. So I'm just looking at some typical marks on the photo where the rocks are, where the horizon is, in order to paint the stairs on here. And I don't really need a guidance for this part here. I can do that by hand. So I'm using a smaller brush here. And I'm kind of looking where the stairs end and where the plateau starts. And I felt confident enough I could do that also without the cardboard guides. I probably could have started with the oils immediately, but oil adds nicely on top of acrylic paint that is. And I also know that acrylic paint attaches nicely to plexiglass, which is also acrylic. So that's why I'm doing it in that order. So that's the very bottom part of the stairs. And part of the railing post of the left-hand side of the railing. And then here, this is such a long railing on this side. I prefer to use some cardboard again to guide me and to get a nice straight line. Not concerned with details yet, this is just blocking in of the colors. A lot of it will get covered. There's a few open spaces on the left-hand railing here, which I would like to keep open. It adds that 3D effect to it, if you can see the layer underneath, which is slightly separated from the layer on top. And then now I'm closing the area that is going to be totally filled up, and there's that little space in between there. So this is all going to be filled. And leaving that little bit of open space on the left there will will certainly add the effect of this photo, of this piece. And now it's time to add the posts on the right hand side. So I start with the large ones. I did the first one already earlier. This is another larger one. And then I'm going to add the other posts in between with an even smaller brush. The most important areas are really done now. This is now adding the posts and then filling up that big space on the bottom. I'm going careful and slow because I want to get this right. I'm not really counting the true number of posts that were here, especially when I'm going to do the smaller ones. It doesn't have to be perfect representation, but I do feel that like the perspective has to be correct in this case. Adding that acrylic medium helps a little bit also in the drying time. It takes a little bit longer to dry. And should I make a mistake, I could still wipe off some of the paint. Fortunately, this didn't happen to me. I didn't have to make any corrections. But with a clean brush or some paper towels, you could still wipe off some of the paint. And it's important, if should that happen, that it will come off nice, because the whole idea is here I would like to have this transparency in between these posts, and anywhere where there's no stairs needs to be fully clear so you can see the background. Of course, I'm painting here, so this takes a little bit longer than the hand coloring, which I normally do, where you can go over large surfaces at once and don't have to worry too much about details, depending on the photo, of course. And here I like to take my time, so I'm just going through this quickly in a time lapse. And you can see the posts also get smaller, as less wide, as they are placed further away from us, from the viewer. So now it's time to fill in that big space at the bottom. It's going to be a little lighter than the rest. In the original photo, that was also a much lighter. Sun is right on it. And there's some shade on the left. So this is really just a matter of filling this whole space up. And then the last part, and then we're done with the acrylics, is adding the metal railing on top of the wood one. And for that I just mix a little bit of black and white to get a darker gray. And again, not too confident doing this all by hand without any support, so I like to use another cardboard for some guidance here. And this is not too much of a distance from this part to the side of the photo, so this I can do without any support. So it's looking pretty good. Just finishing up the attachment thingamabobbers between the metal and the wooden railing. And then just worry about the detail later with the oils. Probably could have left that last one out because it's going to go under the frame later. So the color blocking has been done. This is a nice base for the oils that I'm going to use later to put in the details. I have some liquid to make it dry a little bit faster. Some linseed oil make it a little bit more, to make it a little bit more liquid. And I'm going to start with burnt umber and French ultramarine, which makes it almost black. And first I want to get a good idea of where the actual steps start from the platform. So again, using some cardboard for a guide. And then also for the planks that are on the platform. Again, I'm just using a soft brush that I normally use to color my images with acrylics or with oils when I use a lot of liquid. This is pretty low viscous paint. So I can do that with a soft brush. These are the stairs next to Lifeguard Tower 27 at South Carlsbad State Beach, also known as Ponto. This is actually the north part of Ponto. I took a lot of photos here. Actually, I live not too far from this beach. And this is also where my family like to go like stand-up paddleboard or boogie board. My wife and daughter. There's 4 permanent lifeguard towers here. Which were the subject of many of my photos. These stairs too. They have been the subject of my photos quite a bit. So now I'm painting in shadow here on the poles of the railing. And now of course I will try to stay on the acrylic, paint, the blocking in of the colors that I did earlier. And I'm pretty happy with the perspective here. So first I'm adding all the darker areas and then work my way up towards the lighter ones and the highlights. Especially the left part of the left railing here. It's covered in a lot of shadow. The sun was more to the left. It took me a long time to actually finish this piece. When I went to the beach, what you saw earlier in the video, that was a year ago. And then, of course, COVID happened. That was in March 2020. And I really didn't do anything anymore with this idea. Until a couple of weeks ago, and that's when what you saw earlier, when I actually printed a photo, mounted it, put the plexiglass on. So on the left here, these posts are a lot closer. So I'm again adding the darker parts first. It's hard to see, of course, from this angle here, but there is a clear separation between the painting on top of this plexiglass and then the photo that's underneath. It's only like probably 1/8 of an inch or so, but you can see it. Still using that same mix of burnt umber and blue, French ultramarine. Going to use that for a while. And then I'm still checking on my iPad where all the railing goes and where the different parts of the wood join together. It's very dark on the left here, so I had a little bit of a hard time figuring out where everything goes, but it all turns out well in the end. And you cannot really see that here either, but the plexiglass, of course, is very shiny, reflects light, whereas both the acrylic paint and the oil have a much more matte look. So in the very end, what I will do is I will add a gloss varnish on top of the painting, so that at least the finish will have a very similar look. So the varnish is not really to protect the oil paint. The main reason to do it is just to integrate the photo and the painting a little bit more by giving it a similar finish, a glossy look. It's really starting to come together now. Perspective still looks good. Posts are in. Adding some detail now on the stop railing on the right. These are the little attachments of the metal railing to the wooden part. Still adding in the darker parts, the shadows. And now adding that color to the bottom. Again, the shadow color to the bottom of the railing, of the metal. I did a pretty good job staying on the acrylic paint, but it's probably fine if you go on the plexiglass. Next time I actually might try painting directly with oils on plexiglass. Another idea I have is maybe paint on the back of the plexiglass and then a scene on the front too. Now I'm taking some burnt sienna, mixing a little bit of the burnt umber that I had earlier with the ultramarine, so making it a little bit darker. And that's still a good color for the posts on the left that are still covered in shadow, in the shade, but still have enough contrast so you can distinguish all the different details in the left railing here. So I'm working my way up in color values. This is the next step up from the almost black shadows. And at the same time, I'm also adding in a little bit of detail. Not sure if I mentioned this, but this piece is 3 by 2 feet. And at the very end I will, after I varnished it and everything, I'll also add like a barnwood frame to it. Type of frame that I use a lot with reclaimed wood. Official name is barnwood, but it really comes from fences most of the time. It reminds me of driftwood, and in this case it will also resemble a little bit like the look of these wooden stairs. So I was actually extending the post a little bit here. Like I noticed that I was a little off at where that platform ends and where the posts attach to the steps. So I fixed that here. It's funny, even though I attached the back photo to the acrylic with just some tape on the sides, as you saw in the beginning, it's not permanently attached. You can still remove that tape, and you could actually replace the current photo I have here with something else. Maybe another part of the beach, or maybe even the same part where the tide was much higher. I have some shots also during king tide at this exact same spot, or different season or something. But that's not my plan. I'm gonna stick to this photo, especially when it's framed and closed on the back. I don't want to touch it anymore. It will be finished. Now it's time to add some grain to the boards. This is a little bit lighter burnt sienna. Now I just want to fill this whole area up with this lighter burnt sienna, and then on top of that add an even lighter color, so we get a variation of different browns in the boards now. Really like the look of this piece now. And now I will add some white. This is titanium white to the mix that I was using before. So now I will add a lighter layer on top of the board. And this I'm doing rather casually. I mean, now I would like to start resembling some wood grain. And it's a lot of the same, so speed it up a little bit. Of course, I don't want to go over the shadow part on the left there. And then I'm carefully adding some subtle lines where the steps of the stairs are. So now I added even a little bit more white to get a little bit more variation in the contrast of the grain of the boards. The sun is right on that part there, and it actually also looked very light in the original photo. Which also goes for the posts that are on the right side. So that whole area will get a very light burnt sienna. I added a tad of the darker color here. I didn't want it to get as light as that board on the bottom there on the side. But even now the posts look nice in 3D. By having all the right highlights on them. The shadow parts. But even these little posts here, they needed those little highlights on the side. It's not many different colors I used here. Really, it was burnt umber, burnt sienna, white, and then a little bit of that French ultramarine just to make the burnt umber even darker. But I do like that, like in the background we still have those blues which contrast nicely with all the browns in the foreground. My dog just stopped by to say hi. And my wife was checking out what I was doing. Still adding some detail here and there. Probably could have stopped here. It's always hard to decide when to stop. But I still felt it was not quite done yet, and especially the boards and the planks I'm working on now needed a little bit more detail, and also the metal railing needs a little bit of more highlights. All this part on the right here is all in the bright sun. And so this is where I add some of the highlights to the metal. Of course, I'm also trying not to go outside of where the acrylic paint is, because this would be hard to remove now. And my wife's stopping by again with the dog. I decided the left-hand railing there needed a little bit more detail, but not add too many light colors. It's actually mixing in with the paint that's already there. I believe, actually, now that I think of it, it may have been my wife who said that she thought it was way too dark on the left here. So I'm adding a little bit of detail to the darkest parts of the image. So with a fan brush, I'm adding a few more highlights. I wanted a tiny little bit more contrast in the boards, but I'm not adding too much. And that's my daughter stopping by to look at what I'm doing. Like, this is the first time that I actually did this. I mean, I have printed like photos on the front of acrylic and put a photo on the back, and then hand colored the front or embellished the front. But this is the first time that I actually painted in from scratch a painting on top of a photo, on top of acrylic. And then here are the flip-flops. That one I wanted from the start, when I showed you the picture of the flip-flops I had earlier on. Sitting on the platform of these stairs. So these actually are my wife's flip-flops that I'm painting on. Again, I'm using a reference photo I showed earlier in the beginning of the flip-flops that we put on the stairs a long time ago. think that was at Tower 26. I do think that the flip-flops here do give that little extra oomph, so to say, to this photo. I mean, still would have worked with just the stairs, but I like how the eye is drawn to the flip-flops that will appear here. So this is a mixture of phthalo blue, a little bit of yellow to give it a more aquamarine look, and a lot of white, titanium white. So again, I'm mainly blocking on the colors, the shape, the main shape of the flip-flops, and then I will add some detail later, and some shadows that fall on the boards below the flip-flops. Like finishing the top part of the flip-flops. Still more or less blocking in the color, getting the shape right. So I added a little bit more white to the mix. So now I'm adding the highlights to the top of the flip-flops. And I'm more or less dabbing it on, because I had a hard time brushing it on. I was removing the paint underneath. There are a lot of pebbles on this beach, which I don't really mind. I mean, I like to be in the water most of the time anyway, at South Carlsbad State Beach. Like if you really want good sand, then I would recommend Carlsbad State Beach, which is further more to the north. And if you prefer a very relaxed stand-up paddleboarding exercise, I mean, I prefer the ocean, but it can be tough. Then I would recommend the Agua Hedionda Lagoon in Carlsbad, or perhaps Mission Bay in San Diego. People also like to stand up paddleboard at Oceanside Harbor, or Dana Point Harbor is also a good spot, which is in Orange County, north of San Diego. So it's time to add a little bit more of the darker parts of the flip-flops. So I added a little bit more of the blue. And painting on the side of the flip-flops. And this part here is the shadow that is cast by these top parts of the flip-flops that are cast on the sole. And I was pretty happy at this point here. They look like flip-flops. Cleaning my brush a little, adding again more of the browns from earlier on, so I can add a little bit of shadow that's cast by the flip-flops onto the stairs, the platform. And I thought the shadow I put in earlier was not strong enough, so I'm just using that same darker brown now to add the shadows on top of the sole. At this point I decided that lower flip-flop was not long enough, so extending it a little bit more. So several weeks later, it's time to add the varnish. So I'm using a varnish for acrylic or oil paintings. And again, the main reason I'm doing this, also you can see it makes the colors much more deeper, is that I would like to have a similar finish between the plexiglass and the oil painting that's on top of it. So they now both will have like a glossy finish. I mean, I like contrasts, all kinds of contrasts, like color contrast, black and white, etc. But in this case here, I prefer to have a similar finish between the background, the photo, the plexiglass, and then the painting that's on top of it. So just with a like half-inch brush, I'm just adding carefully the varnish all over. And then I look now and then at a shallow angle to see where I didn't cover the painting yet. You should try to avoid going too many times over the same spot, because it dries fast, this varnish. Also, you can create bubbles in the varnish, so you have to be slow. And of course, this is a time lapse. I'm not going really that fast. I'm doing this slowly. And then I use some smaller brushes to just for these posts. They're a little harder to do. Especially these here, these tiny ones. I am not exactly sure what the effect would be if I would ignore like the empty space in between, and I mean just go over that with varnish too, just to save some time and take big swoops at once. I wanted to be sure that it would look good, and instead I'm carefully just going over where the paint is. I was afraid that you would still notice the difference between where varnish would be on the plexiglass versus where it would be uncovered. So I'm just taking my time and finishing it properly. And that's it. It's all done, and now the very last thing to do is to frame it. And here we are, finally, after 1 year, I finished my piece where I painted with oils on the front of acrylic with a background which is a photo. So I hope you like this video, hope you like the artwork. Please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.